Thank you, Mr. President, and I'll be very brief. I'll contribute to the topic on the soil management in Africa and model law, and on food security. Mr. President, allow me to first note my thoughts on the topic that came up on Zimbabwe, that the land issue there is what is causing food shortages. I have a different perspective. I think the problems in a country like Zimbabwe, we know it's because of sanctions, and that's what is causing to the shortage of food in Zimbabwe. There's been sanctions for the last 10 years, and above all, they have the rains, they have everything. But because of sanctions, we end up with that situation. Otherwise, if the problem was due to land distribution, would have had a similar problem in South Africa as well. There was land distribution, and there's a topic of land, but they have enough food security. That said, Madam, Mr. Speaker, allow me to note that the problem in Africa really with the soils, we have countries that have fertile soils, and we have countries that have good rainfall. I was just being told by colleagues from Uganda that actually they have 2 rain seasons. And then we have countries where there's drought. The whole year they would not have a rain season. With that, you have countries that produce a lot of food. Zambia, for instance, each year we have tons and tons of maize, more than that we need. If you go to other countries, Uganda, Kenya, you find even there they produce millet, sorghum, matoki, plenty of it. Matoki is we eat it in the canteen. Matoki is bananas that are cut raw and then fried and boiled. It's a staple food in East Africa in some areas. In some countries you have plenty. In Malawi you have plenty of fish, and elsewhere. So the question, Mr. President, is why then some people are still going hungry in Africa? In some countries there's still poverty. It's because, as I'm winding up, the solution and the cause of the problem and the solution is that as African countries we are not united. Those who have, they hold on to what they have. In my vernacular we call it ubutani. You have so much of what you have produced, instead of sharing with your neighbor, not giving them free, selling to them, you would rather just hold on to what you have. And then those who don't have, they might have something else as well, they just hold on to it. In economic terms, that is called barriers of trade. There's so much barriers of trade amongst our countries. Even when you have plenty, to just take to the next country, it's a process of 3 months. There's so much red tape, the paperwork. And in the end, all of us in Africa don't win. We all end up poor. Because those who had plenty, some of it goes to waste until the next season. As Africa, we need to learn to hold hands. Our forefathers that brought up the terms Harambe, Ujamaa. Harambe from Kenya meaning you hold hands, I think, and Ujamaa in Tanzania, you hold hands. They are the vision when they brought it up. Nyerere, Kaunda, Jomo Kenyatta, and all those. That was the language. We have this Pan-Africa, but they started the idea then. They realized you have to hold hands. So this parliament is just one element of how the African Union is holding hands. The AU is holding hands, but I think we are holding hands politically. In politics, we've held hands, but economically, we have not held hands. Economically, we do butani. Each one just holds on to what they have and stingy the neighbor. And then the neighbor starve, and then even in our parts of our neighbor, if something would have come from there, we also starve. So we need to emulate what the Europeans did when they formed the European Commission, the EU. And with time, 10 years later, it has come to pass. There's evidence that the countries in Europe that held hands, economically now they are surviving. One country that refused to hold hands with the rest, they said, we'll be on our own, is the UK. What's happened to the UK? Today, there's so much economic instability there. They are even changing prime ministers or presidents, 3 presidents or 3 prime ministers in 2 months. It's because, in my own mind, it's because they refuse to hold hands with others in Europe when they formed the European Union. So even Africa, the solution to all of us in Africa being together economically and to have enough food is if we hold hands, and the AU stops only being a union of politics and becomes a union of economic integration for all African countries. I submit, Mr. President, and I thank you.